Identified the man behind a Philadelphia standoff with police yesterday. Now, officers say Maurice Hill is in custody. Now, it happened Wednesday afternoon when officers tried to issue a narcotics warrant. When he refused to cooperate, officers say he barricaded himself inside his home. And during the standoff, gunfire was exchanged. 6 police officers were hit, but luckily there were no fatalities. But the incident is raising the issues of gun control and police and community relations. So for the 360 View, we turn to our political panel, attorney and former Georgia State lawmaker LaDawn Jones and conservative commentator Rebecca Walser. Thank you so much for joining me, ladies.
Thanks, Scotty.
Thank you, Scotty.
Okay, so LaDawn, I want to start with you. This was a drug raid that basically went bad. But do showings like this have a positive or negative effect on this conversation about improving the relationship between the police and the community that they are in?
Boy, this makes it very hard. So as a former prosecutor, I've worked with a lot of local law enforcement up close and personal, and they have hard jobs. But I've also represented people as a criminal defense attorney, and I've heard their opinions about the police. America has always had a tough relationship with law enforcement, particularly minorities coming out of slavery into Jim Crow, and still until today with social media still showing excessive force has been used. I don't think that this helps. We have to find some way to bridge that gap, to rebuild the respect that we have as individuals, as Americans, for our law enforcement, but also starting with law enforcement showing respect for the individuals that they are there to serve.
Well, that's true. It's like with any other relationship. It's a two-way street. That being said, Rebecca, was it a good idea, do you think, for the Philadelphia mayor to almost immediately come out and say, for gun control? A lot of people are pointing out that this man would have still been able to get his hands on an illegal gun, which it was, after 6 of his officers had been shot. Did that help the conversation yesterday?
Well, I don't agree with those people. I don't know what they're talking about. This man has had a criminal record going back 18 years since he's 18 years old. He's been convicted felon, and most gun control laws absolutely prevent a convicted felon from having a legal firearm, and certainly an automatic one. So I don't know who's saying that he has a right to a legal gun. Criminals don't don't abide by the law. If they're going to commit a crime and they want a gun to do it, they're going to do that. And that's the whole reason that gun control really takes away the rights of Americans to exercise their Second Amendment rights and not the rights of criminals, because they're not obeying the law in the first place.
Right, and that's been some of the debates that have been going on right now, especially coming out of El Paso, where there was a legal gun that was unfortunately used in that situation, and now we have an illegal gun. So you're seeing both sides of the argument. But on that course, and LaDawn, what we were talking about earlier, at the same time, a CBS reporter tweeted this out, and it had a video has emerged of the crowd around the police officers laughing and yelling at them in the midst of gunfire. And she's talking about the actual scene that's going on, that even as she was doing her live shot, she was harassed during that live shot, and a major moment of disappointment this evening was watching this crowd of people taunt police officers, laughing and yelling at them in the midst of gunfire. But I also remember in June, in this same exact apartment, there were 72 police officers that were pulled off after thousands of their violent, racist social media posts were found by a watchdog group. So how do we solve this problem?
You know, I think that when President Obama came in with his community-oriented policing and his other criminal justice measures, we really need to continue that path. We need to ensure that we are retraining law enforcement, that they're not supposed to be aggressive law enforcement. They're supposed to be community-based, but safe, because they also need to go home to their families. We also need to start an entire new generation of young people that want to go into law enforcement, that want to go into prosecution, people who are not held back by these old beliefs. It was sad. I hate to hear that people were laughing when anyone was getting shot, particularly those people that will be there if you were in stress or were in need or were on the other side of that. But I think it starts with law enforcement. They have to show and prove, and getting rid of the officers whose social media posts were inappropriate is a good first step, but we got a long way to go.
And that is very true. Now, Rebecca, at the same time, President Trump did tweet out, because he tweets out about everything, and he called for police to get tougher on street crime. But how can they do this? In this case, like you pointed out, the man had a long rap sheet, and these were not just nice crimes. These were very, very scary crimes that he was a part of, and yet he would be released each time. How can we do this job if, on one hand, we're finding people that are kept in jail for minor offenses for time upon time, but in this case, he was let out. So without it feels like we're in this hamster wheel that's continuing to cause these kind of problems.
Yes, I have to say that President Trump's criminal justice reform, was a step in the right direction, because we do have problems. We don't have a perfect system. But when you have a criminal like this who has an 18-year history of crimes at the state level and the federal level, still on the streets, basically in a home with access to these weapons illegally and, making this kind of scene, it's awful. But, Scotty, I'm here in New York tonight, and I think of all the buckets throwing being at police. And where's Mayor de Blasio, and what is he doing about that? If we don't have our politicians supporting our police officers when they're being taunted and assaulted basically with buckets and water, just doing their job, if we don't have politicians that support and back up the blue of our country, this is the kind of thing that will, people standing around and taunting the police is just totally unacceptable, because those are the first people you're calling, 911, when something's wrong with your situation.
And that's the thing, LaDawn. Last night I did see on both sides of the aisle, luckily, both candidates from presidential candidates on the Democrat and the Republican side tweeted out positive supportive comments for law enforcement last night. And this idea that we do have these repeat offenders, and somehow we can't keep the ones who are really bad behind jail, and yet the ones that they say are of minor crimes or can actually be up for reform in the community, they're sitting behind jail bars for years. Why are we not able to have that kind of conversation and get good prison reform actually passed right now? Is it too complicated?
It is not too complicated, but it's one of those conversations people don't like to have, especially politicians. Number one, we need to get rid of private prisons. When you take the profit out of prison, which started after slavery in our country, it creates a different incentive. If these private prisons were now run by the government, who then has an incentive to educate and train these people, which credit to President Trump, his criminal justice reform is about helping to educate the people that are there to reduce their sentences, so get props for that. We have to change the way we think about our jails and our prisons. And one of the things we can do is not lock people up for things like marijuana, which is legal in one state, but then illegal in another state, right? That grows contempt for the law. And that's what happens when people have contempt for the law. They laugh at it.
Well, nobody ever laughs when you ladies come on unless you tell a really good joke. Then thank you for tackling a very serious subject in such a respectful manner. LaDawn, Rebecca, thank you for joining us.